I accept that to some extent. Obviously, I reported to the police, but like I'm choosing to engage in the way that I do, understanding that this might be the result of what happens. If you're worried that Democrats are fear-mongering, and then on the other side of that, Donald Trump is talking about revoking the citizenship from people in Congress that he doesn't like, what the am I supposed to say about that? Like,
what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So this one is a political debate that I have been wanting to react to for a while now. You have got Destiny going up against Blair White with Brad moderating, and the topic shifts into whether the Supreme Court is actually doing its job as a check on power, or whether it is quietly picking sides. And let me tell you, there is one moment in this conversation where Destiny brings up a comparison that literally leaves the entire panel speechless. You are going to want to stick around for that, because it completely reframes how you think about the court system. Also drop a comment and let me know what part of the world you are tuning in from. I always love seeing how far this community reaches. All right, let us get right into it.
I do just think it sends a totally contradictory message that we're going to be going after our enemies. It's our turn now, and when, especially when they campaigned against the weaponization of government, feels like they've done a lot of that. I want to talk about the Supreme Court a little bit because this is a big subject of discussion after a very controversial ruling about the Voting Rights Act, and it's a modern day interpretation that was handed down. But now you have Democrats, many of them have for a while now clamored to pack the Supreme Court, to add additional justices specifically to skew the ideological bent of the court and remove it as a meaningful check on their power or what they can do when they retake control. And now apparently even the leaders of the Democratic Party are open to the idea. So here is Hakeem Jeffries being asked about court packing, and here's how he responded. Listen to this.
In the new Congress, we're going to have to do something about this Supreme Court. And let me be very clear. Everything is on the table. Everything to deal with this corrupt MAGA majority that is issuing political opinions that are designed to bolster the prospects of the Republican Party, and we will not allow them to succeed.
So President Trump responded to this by calling Hakeem Jeffries a low IQ individual and pointing out that he said the Supreme Court is illegitimate. Trump writes on Truth Social, after saying such a thing, isn't he subject to impeachment? I got impeached for a perfect phone call. Not sure that's quite how I remember it, but okay. Where are you, Republicans? Why not get it started? They'll be doing this to me. I mean, Destiny, members of Congress can't, in fact, be impeached. That's not a thing. I would have hoped that Trump would know that. But it is concerning to me, and that's ridiculous that he's trying to get someone removed for saying this. But I mean, do you support packing the Supreme Court? Do you agree that this is a MAGA Supreme Court? Because that's not my read on it at all.
I think the Roberts is just completely and totally unhinged. Reading the leaked papers that I think were published in the New York Times for kind of the start of the whole shadow docket business, that was just unbelievable to me. Unfortunately, I haven't read the last opinion yet. I don't have enough alcohol in my house at the moment to go through a whole 90 pages authored by Alito, because holy Christ, that's going to be inducing. But some of the decisions and some of the completely contrary reasoning that have come from this court are just astounding to me. You'd have to get into
But do you acknowledge
particulars.
they've ruled against Trump on tariffs, against him on deploying the National Guard? There's like 40% or so of the rulings are unanimous. There's actually a lot of bipartisan consensus, and it's not a partisan court.
I mean, Hitler killed
You might disagree
Hitler.
with them.
I mean, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. Yeah, there have been things that even this court has not ruled in Trump's favor for. But I mean, like, they basically axed part of the 14th Amendment. They gave Trump immunity, the president, from all crimes. It seems like they've given him a pass on a lot of behavior.
That's not. They didn't give him immunity from all crimes.
They did.
That's an oversimplification of the ruling.
They did.
They said that the exercise of core presidential powers, you have immunity for. But there's things
without
that
defining
you don't
what those are, and leaving the definition broad enough that essentially anything could come under that.
It'll all have to be fleshed out, but it's just, so when you're demonizing the Supreme Court as a MAGA court, even though there's this vast ideologically diversity on it, I mean, actually the Supreme Court is one of the only institutions in America that is running relatively well, like much better than Congress, much better than the presidency. And yet you have Democrats like Hakeem Jeffries, but even to his left flank, the people that are saying, stack it with judges. How do you fight somebody like Trump, who you say is authoritarian, with authoritarian suggestions of your own, like packing a high court?
So the host reads out a Truth Social post where the president is calling for the impeachment of a sitting member of Congress. And I need you to understand something. Members of Congress cannot be impeached. That is not how any of this works. The Constitution is very clear about this. Impeachment applies to the president, the vice president, and civil officers of the federal government. Senators and House members are not civil officers. They can be expelled by their own chamber with a 2/3 vote. But impeachment? That is a completely different process. And the fact that someone occupying the highest office in the country does not know this basic civics lesson that you could literally Google in 5 seconds is genuinely alarming. Even the host had to stop and correct it on air. That tells you everything. But here is where it gets really interesting. The conversation shifts to the Supreme Court and whether it is a partisan institution. And the host starts throwing out this talking point about how 40% of decisions are unanimous and the court rules against the administration sometimes. And sure, on the surface that sounds reasonable. But Destiny cuts right through it, because when it came to presidential immunity, they handed down a ruling that essentially says a president has immunity for exercising core presidential powers. Sounds fine until you realize they never defined what core presidential powers actually are. They left it completely open-ended. That is not a narrow ruling. That is a blank check with no expiration date. And when the host tries to push back, the best he can come up with is, well, it will all have to be fleshed out. That is not a rebuttal. That is an admission that even he knows the ruling is dangerously vague. You cannot sit here and tell me the court is functioning as a proper check on power when they are handing out undefined immunity to the executive branch. That is not how checks and balances are supposed to work.
Steve.
I think that there are really good reasons why the Supreme Court should be reformed. I think that we should have at least one judge per circuit. I think that makes sense. And I think that we should have some kind of term limit on judges so that we have a more regular appointing of judges by the president. I think it's really weird that one president could have 0 and the next could have 4. That seems to be really silly.
But that's different from court packing.
I agree. I think that to the chagrin of my more left friends, I don't think I would necessarily be in favor of let's just throw 5 judges on the court. I think I would be in favor of a wink wink court packing, but done as a part of a larger court reform package, basically. Also to say this is not a partisan court, there are 9 votes on the Supreme Court. And Republicans get 2 free spaces on every major decision. That's kind of crazy. Okay, that's a little bit crazy.
Well, I think I would be much more open if your argument is that Alito and Thomas are MAGA justices. I would be much more open to that.
Well, yeah, no, they are. That's what I'm saying. But you get 2 freebies. You have
but what I'm saying is Neil Gorsuch, Amy Coney Barrett, John Roberts, they're all independents, and they do not just do whatever Republicans. In fact, I see so much hate from Republicans for those justices. Blair, I'll bring you in here. Sorry.
Yes, one of the things that Trump has been bitching about the most is that so many aspects of his agenda have not been able to go through because of the Supreme Court. So to pretend as if it's a MAGA court, I don't really agree with. And I also agree that it's one of the few institutions that I have a little bit of faith in currently still right now. Hakeem Jeffries, he is low IQ in my opinion. The reason he was even going off about the Supreme Court because he was saying that Black people had their right to vote taken away in Louisiana. It's completely insane. And it's also, just to kind of tie it into the rest of the topics we've been going through here, that's also the stuff that, I'm not going to sit here and say that's a direct, inciting of violence or anything, but when you create a climate and a culture where people really genuinely think that their basic fundamental rights are being taken away even when they're not, you create this sort of air of desperation that kind of sounds a bit like the manifesto from the shooter at the White House Correspondents' Dinner, this sort of other world they're living in where all of their rights are being taken away and everything's coming crashing down, and they may feel a desperation to do something. I'm not going to say Hakeem was directly inciting there, but I think that overall, I don't like the sort of we talk about the extreme things Republicans say that Trump says. I also don't like the extremity on the other side where it's gay people are getting thrown in cams, Black people can't vote anymore, women are losing their right to vote. All those things create this climate that I also don't want to live in because it leads to other things. Because,
Stephen, sometimes when we talk about this extreme rhetoric, and I think progressive commentators have a point about this, they say, well, it's not Democrat elected officials, it's just commentators and TikTokers. But when it comes to this kind of thing, it very much is Democratic elected officials who make hyperbolic doomsday rhetoric, they're doing Jim Crow 2.0, they're trying to get rid of the 19th Amendment with the SAVE Act, they're trying to stop married women from voting. These these things that have very minimal basis in reality and are obviously hyperbolic. And I agree, they're not like actual incitements of violence, but they are bringing up the temperature, which, yes, I understand you're going to say Trump does even more so when he calls people traitors and treasonous and says they're going to destroy the country and all that. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's right for Democratic leaders to do it.
Now, this is where the conversation gets really productive because Destiny lays out an actual framework for court reform that is not just about stacking seats. He talks about having one judge per circuit, implementing term limits so appointments are more predictable, and making the system less dependent on luck and timing. And you know what the host says he goes that is different from court packing? And Destiny agrees. He literally says he would not just throw 5 judges on the court. He wants it done as part of a broader reform package. That is a measured, reasonable position. And then he drops this line that I think is so underrated. He says there are 9 votes on the Supreme Court and Republicans get 2 free spaces on every major decision. He is talking about Alito and Thomas, and even the host concedes that point. He says he would be much more open to the argument if it is framed around those 2 justices specifically. That is a conservative host on camera agreeing that 2 of the justices are essentially rubber stamps. You do not get that admission every day. But then Blair comes in, and this is where things go sideways for me. She starts talking about how Hakeem Jeffries is low IQ and how Democrats are creating a culture where people believe their rights are being taken away when they are not. And she connects that to the mindset of the shooter at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Now hold on. You have to understand what just happened there. She is drawing a line from Democratic rhetoric about voting rights all the way to political violence. But when it comes to the other side, when the president is literally calling for political opponents to be jailed, calling them treasonous, pardoning people who attack law enforcement, that somehow does not create the same climate? The double standard is unreal. You cannot blame one side for creating an air of desperation while completely ignoring that the other side has the most powerful person on the planet doing the exact same thing, but with actual governmental power behind it.
That's what I would say, okay? If I go to an event, okay, and some conservative guy, shows up and he manages to sneak up on me and he punches me or whatever because of the shit that I talk online, I would be upset, but I would get it, right? I'm a very inflammatory figure. I understand that's the speech that I engage in. Somebody might show up in real life and want to, beat the shit out of me or whatever. I get that. I accept that to some extent. Obviously, I report it to the police, but I'm choosing to engage in the way that I do, understanding that this might be the result of what happens. If you're worried that Democrats are fear-mongering, and then on the other side of that, Donald Trump is talking about revoking the citizenship from people in Congress that he doesn't like, what the fuck am I supposed to say about that? Yeah, Democrats are going a little bit far on the other side, but holy f***, does Donald Trump not literally give them the easiest layups in the world for this? And nobody on the Republican Party seems interested in contradicting him here. So,
do you think the flip side of that also, though, is that because Democrats and progressives cry wolf all the time, that when Trump actually is saying crazy shit or it actually is getting a little dystopian, the public has been desensitized to that because people were marching over the Handmaid's Tale outfits in the first term over relatively benign things?
Yeah, you're preaching my song. Yeah, I complain about this shit for ever. People have been calling Trump a fascist for 500 years, and I think it's the stupidest thing in the world. But now, I think in this term, 100% Trump operates in almost an indistinguishable manner from a fascist who is trying to leverage whatever tools he can in our democratic republic, and to bend him in his favor. But it kind of loses any point of saying it when people have been calling him a fascist for a decade. I mean, I do agree with you there that there was way too much of that for too long, but liberals
he still is,
autocorrect.
But he still is also constrained by various checks and balances.
No, he's not.
He is abiding
barely.
By.
The Supreme Court has blocked multiple things he's tried to do.
Yeah. So the tariffs would be an example I would use, right? And that they kind of blocked it in one way, and then Donald Trump immediately re-levied basically every tariff at a slightly lower percentage because he hated another way to do it. Right. This is not a meaningful check on power. The tariffs that he did do for a year.
Check. Trump is seething about having to return the money and about
that's fine that Trump is seething. He's not returning the money. I don't know where you got that from. That's funny, but I don't think we're ever getting that money back. So that means that Trump. What does it mean when the Supreme Court rules against him? They're essentially saying that this action was illegal. When I do something illegal, I would go to jail for it. I would imagine.
Okay,
if you do something illegal,
that's not how it works. Biden lost at the Supreme Court for his student loans being illegal and other things.
That's very true. And for that, we can have conversations about the shadow docket. We can talk about preliminary motions, because it's interesting that when Biden wanted to do the student loan forgiveness, all of a sudden, oh my God, what was that thing that we just got rid of? The nationwide injunction came out. One person sued and the whole Supreme Court was like, well, actually, hold on. We don't think the government can do this at all. We're going to enjoin their behavior from forgiving any student loans. And no student loans were forgiven before that Supreme Court decision went through. What happened with the tariffs? we'll let it stand. What is this? What about status quo? What about irreparable harm? All these elements for meeting the, what you would need for an executive stay or for a preliminary injunction.
Right,
all
but I brought that up because you're saying when something's illegal, I go to jail. But that's just not how it works with presidents.
No, but what I'm saying is that that all those examples are in my court, because Biden wanted to do the student loan forgiveness, and that was stayed by the court. They said, no, hold on, you don't get to do any of that until we make a decision. For the tariffs, they were like, fuck it, tariff them for a year or more, and we'll make a ruling on it eventually. They ruled on it. They said, oh, that was illegal. But guess what? He got to tariff us. Our shit was, it's gone. We're never getting that money back.
And this is the moment that I think wins the entire segment, because the host hits Destiny with this challenge about Democrats fear-mongering and exaggerating threats. And Destiny does not dodge it. He actually agrees. He says people have been crying wolf for way too long and it was the stupidest thing in the world. But then he pivots and says that right now, in this current term, the behavior coming from the top is genuinely indistinguishable from someone trying to bend every tool of government in their personal favor. And the fact that he can acknowledge the left too far in the past while still making the case that right now things are different, that is what makes it so effective. Because it is not partisan cheerleading, it is an honest assessment. But the best part comes at the very end when they start talking about whether the courts are actually functioning as a real check on executive power. And Destiny brings up this comparison that I think is absolutely devastating. He points out that when the previous administration tried to do student loan forgiveness, the courts shut it down immediately. One person sued and the entire program was frozen before a single dollar went out. But when it came to tariffs that were later ruled illegal, the administration was allowed to collect them for over a year before the court even made a decision. And now that money is just gone, nobody is getting it back. He was so confident about this that he literally offered a $20 bet on camera, and the host could not even push back on it. Think about what that means. In one case, the court acted instantly to block something that would have helped everyday people. In the other case, they let something that hurt everyday people continue for over a year and then said, oops, that was illegal. If that does not show you how the system operates differently depending on who is in power and who benefits, I do not know what will. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments, please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.